because obviously the US has enjoyed the privilege
It's a privilege
of having the dominant global reserve currency, and that's not something you're going to want to give up.
Yeah.
So I don't see the US just saying, all right, sure, go for it.
Welcome back, everybody. You are watching How About That Crypto, your home for crypto and Web3 news and updates with your host, Bitcoin Stylist. Now, I hope you all had a good holiday weekend, and happy Passover and happy Easter. And I'm coming back to you today, and just to look, there are two main things that I feel like are really important. You know, I reported on what I consider the most important things in my last few episodes, which have to do with the US government, the administration, and the federal regulators going after crypto. Different, banks have taken a hit, as well as different lawsuits have been filed, like Coinbase and the Coinbase versus CFTC, and the Coinbase versus SEC, and Binance versus CFTC. Well, there's two conversations that I see emerging, and I just really curious to see where this goes. And the two topics that are emerging are bifurcation, or let's say de-dollarization. So you got de-dollarization, and then you have the Ethereum upgrade. That's right. Today is the big Ethereum upgrade, the second upgrade. And that's when all the validators will be able to unstake, but I'll get to that in a second. I'm going to start off today's news with a conversation about the de-dollarization narrative. Just some really interesting insight here. Don't forget, this is not financial advice. You can use the links below to do your own research. All right. So you just listened to a little clip from this interview. It's really good. I'll leave the link in the description below. Now it is on kitco.com. And if you don't know, Kitco is notorious for selling gold and silver. A lot of their, in general, in commodities, a lot of their news and interviews are kind of slated toward buying hard assets. And so you're not going to really get any friendly news, through, and I would be surprised throughout any part of history of Kitco that they are promoting positive narratives about the dollar. However, I've been seeing it, and I'm sure you've been seeing it too, all over social media and the mainstream media, like CNN and Bloomberg. They're all talking about it. Fox News, so I thought it was interesting, and I feel like this is a good conversation to have. Now, when I think of de-dollarization, I think what most people think of is that the dollar isn't going to be, no one's going to want to hold the dollar anymore. Well, studies have shown that more and more countries are buying less and less treasury assets, meaning that less and less the world is allowing the US to print without consequence. They're, continue to expand their monetary supply, aka print money without consequence. And then the sanctions against Russia that were seen by many countries who didn't really care about Russia invading Ukraine. And I'm not saying I don't care. I'm not saying I care. I'm just, reporting to you a bunch of information that connect to me to tell a story. And one of those pieces is more and more countries are looking at the US as a liability because they see Russia doing something that the US didn't like, and so that they sanctioned them and essentially stole all their money. Now, maybe they should have had their money stolen. I'm not here to debate that. I'm just saying that if you're a foreign actor, you're some country in South America or in Africa, and you don't necessarily need the US dollar as much as, say, a country like El Salvador, who uses the US dollar, you might ask yourself, like, if you're like Brazil, you might be like, oh, my country's getting real big. And what if we need to make a move that's in our interest that the US or the Europeans don't like? Well, I don't want to have to worry about the US dollar system, banking system, taking me out. So now you're seeing more and more currency swaps between BRIC nations. The BRIC growth has surpassed the growth of the US and the European Union. Like all basically the West is not growing at as fast of a pace as the BRIC countries. So there's a lot of power coming from these countries. And it doesn't really matter. Like a lot of people want to say that, well, what currency are these people gonna use? Like no one trusts China to be truthful about their reserves, and they could debase their money supply too. So is it about debasement? Is that really the concern, or is it more of a security concern, or is it more just like other countries are thinking to themselves, maybe we need to diversify? What's happening with the US? Are we going to be able to make a comeback and rise to a high level of productivity and innovation? And what's happening? So this conversation is not about some of the reasons why the US is where they are. This conversation is more about the fact that we are in the world where we are. Now, go ahead and check this out. Listen to some of this. It's a few minutes, and I'm going to stop along the way. Okay.
How do you see the US preventing this, reacting to this?
I think it's sticks and carrots with the global South, bribes and threats.
Let's talk about the sticks.
Well, the sticks
military
are,
action?
they're already, you saw that the U.S. just threatened certain countries, I think the UAE and someone else, about being excluded from G7 markets if they find ways around sanctions. So the U.S. is
Yellen
trying.
was in South Africa recently, giving the South Africans a warning about sticking with the sanctions.
Yeah, so there will be a lot of those, but the BRICS are a very powerful bloc.
So what they're saying is that basically the U.S. officials, through all their means, through their banking telecommunication systems, through the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, G7, I mean, all these different organizations are really trying to maintain the integrity of the sanctions against Russia. But it just looks like, there's just more and more people that are interested in doing business with Russia, the largest supplier of commodities, and China, the largest consumer of commodities and one of the largest producers of consumer goods. I don't know. It's like, let's just keep listening here, and then I'll tell you the problems with this perspective too.
And they're about to get bigger. How are you going to stop it? My guess, and the thing we want to prevent, because every time there's been a change of power throughout history, from one dominant power to another, which usually goes with the reserve currency also, there's a conflict. And what we don't want in today's age is a conflict. And I think, like, I'm talking about a hot war. And so I'm hoping that at some point they'll reach a consensus. The U.S. has to know it can't remain dominant forever.
Okay. So when he's talking about a war, he doesn't mean the Ukraine war. That's more of that's something different. What he's saying is like the U.S. actually engages in war with another nation directly. Now, he's also saying that the U.S. has to recognize that they won't remain dominant forever. But if you listen to Congress or the president, you're not going to hear them say that. None of them are going to none of these people are proactive enough to get out ahead of this. They're just going to continuously allow the entire system they're going to try to control and prop it up for as long as they can, so then as a retail investor, what are you supposed to do? Personally, I think that I'm not going to buy yuan. I'm not going to buy the ruble. I'm not going to buy anybody else's currency. But I guess that leaves me to buy Bitcoin, right? And gold. And that's basically what these people are saying, because unless you're willing to hold another nation's currency, which I'm not, then that's kind of where we're at. So this is the point I'm trying to make here, is like, what happens if there is bifurcation or a splitting of the reserve system. And then all of a sudden we got multiple reserve systems. Is the US reserve currency, is the US going to allow American citizens to use any other system other than the US dollar system? Are they going to force us to become more poor by not allowing us to diversify away from an inflating asset? That's a good question.
It can't. The world has changed. It's not 1945 any longer. And so, the U.S. is not the sole global economic power, the sole military power. So there has to be a change, and you would hope they'd do it like they did Bretton Woods, the original one, through consensus. I just worry that we're living in a very fragile geopolitical world right now where that's not going to happen, and that worries me.
Well, Frank, they say the biggest lesson of history is that people don't learn the lessons of history.
Yeah, that's why I read a lot of history.
Yeah. So look, every reserve currency has a life cycle. I mean, Ray Dalio has obviously spoken about this extensively. But the US is aware that the sunset may be here. Again, I just don't see even this administration, which is perceived, I think it's fair to say, on the global stage as perhaps a weaker administration than prior administrations. I don't see relinquishing this kind of power.
No, the US is not going to relinquish any power, and it just feels like they're trying to prevent us through all this regulation from moving our money out of dollars and into other assets. It's like the only assets you're allowed to buy are dollar denominated assets, unless you buy physical gold, physical silver. I guess you could buy property. You're going to buy that in dollars, but it has like physical, whatever properties to it. But I also don't want to be like, I'm running away from US dollars, because I don't think this is going to happen overnight unless there's a conflict, like he's talking about, war or some other thing that causes a complete crash of our system. But if our system crashed, then others would probably too, maybe. So I don't know how this all plays out, how long it takes. So I personally am not rushing to get rid of all my dollars and buy Bitcoin or any other crypto. But I would try to move my dollars into real estate, buy a little more gold, buy a little more Bitcoin. But ultimately, dollars are important because you got to pay your bills and your taxes, etc. So don't forget that. It's not financial advice, all right?
They will try and prevent it. I just don't see how they can in the long run. But they will try and prevent it. Because think of what happens if the U.S. dollar loses its reserve status, its supreme reserve status. What does that mean for interest rates? What does that mean for inflation? What does that mean for servicing U.S. debt?
It's a catastrophe.
To me, it's a national security issue. And so I think it's going to be ugly, whatever happens.
Now, a national security issue to keep the U.S. dollar dominant could be used against crypto. I've only heard Donald Trump say that, and maybe a couple of other politicians and leaders. I heard a couple of lead people in TradFi say that it's not good. Like Ken Griffin said, it's a jihadi movement against the dollar. He later retracted and said he was wrong about that, but still, like, this is a narrative that can be played out to justify the restrictions to U.S. citizens, of course, unaccredited investors, people that don't have a lot of money because they don't have the means to necessarily skirt this stuff. Like a wealthy person could have bank accounts in other countries. This is really coming down to hurting everyday people if this whole concept of a national security threat to prop up the dollar enters, because ultimately the dollar is not going to reign supreme long term. So my concern is that over the short term, the people that, like myself, that are regular people that don't make a ton of money are just going to take the brunt of the decline of the US dollar dominance without any options to preserve our wealth other than US dollars and US dollar denominated assets. So just a thought.
But I don't see how they can stop it. And and again, I think it has to be carefully worded. The approach by if it's, say it's the BRICS, and the BRICS with an expansion, they have to do it in a manner that it's not taking over from the US dollar, it's just an alternative to the US dollar.
So what he's talking about is a new reserve currency, something that is not replacing the dollar, but joining the dollar, because the dollar US will never step down and go to the table to negotiate away their dominance. And so he's not talking about Bitcoin or crypto, just so you know, but I am.
I still don't think that's going to go over very well, but people have to stop talking about, the destruction of the US dollar and, replacing the US dollar. It's a substitute.
Well, hence you've used the term bifurcation,
Yes.
as in split, because in
Yeah.
your thesis, the dollar is still in play, but just not as powerfully. So who is on Team Dollar?
Europe, Japan, Australia, Canada.
And they would have a vested interest in pushing against this alternative currency as well?
I would think so. We have the North American Trade Agreement here, the NAFTA, and no, I just think it's really it's the West, which is U.S., Japan, and Europe, Canada, Australia, that sort of collective, and then you got the rest of the world. You have the BRICS, and you have the Global South, and they all have different needs and agendas.
Right. Well, what could possibly derail this agenda?
A war.
All right. So basically, I think that was just a really good interview. I think you should re-listen to the whole interview. When I listen to that interview, I think about the fact that we're in the midst of changing in power and dominance. That doesn't mean that the U.S. dollar system or the U.S. government is going to collapse. It just means that as these historically poorer nations or developing nations become not developing nations, like, is China still a developing nation? There's some debate about that. But as these countries like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, specifically Brazil, India, and China, continue to get bigger and bigger and more dominant and building up more industry and infrastructure, etc., they are going to demand more economic activity, and they realize that the way that they became dominant through the U.S. system and probably relying on consumption from the West and each other probably, but these people are saying, okay, well, that just because we got here this way doesn't mean we're gonna be able to stay in this position or even grow beyond what we possibly could. So it makes sense that they want another option other than the dollar, because the US might become more and more hostile towards the rest of the world as its dominance wanes. If I was a non-US, I mean, I would think that way about any other nation that's in this similar position, is, we should diversify ourselves. Well, and as an American citizen, I think that it's important that I diversify myself. Now, if I buy Bitcoin, and it might, who knows, maybe it'll be something that my children use or are able to benefit from. Maybe in my lifetime, I'm not that old. So I do think in my lifetime, you're going to see this happen. So this is like, at worst case scenario, let's call this a retirement plan. But if you're thinking you're going to get rich off of this, then I don't know what to tell you. Good luck. Because I would not be jumping into this on the impression that I'm going to get rich. I would be thinking this is going to create generational wealth and bring in a whole new class of a whole new group of people into the wealthier class. So I'm doing this for legacy. I'm doing this to upgrade my family's lineage in terms of social and economic mobility. So that's what I see. Tell me what you see. Let me know. Leave a comment below. And just real quick, we got the Ethereum Shanghai Upgrade. Now this is following the original one in, let's see, where is it, September. In September, we had an upgrade called the merge, and the merge basically took, Ethereum was proof of work. It merged the proof of work and proof of stake blockchains together to get rid of proof of work. And so now Ethereum is proof of stake. Well, this next merge is really important, or sorry, this next upgrade is really important. The reason why it's so important is something called EIP 4895. And this allows validators to withdraw staked tokens. So if you're concerned about price, there's a lot of people think that people are going to unstake their ETH after they get it out. It says up here that, let's see, 14% of all ETH are currently staked as of April 5th, last week, accounting for 16 million tokens with a valuation of 26 billion. I just listened to something this morning saying that half of everybody that's holding ETH is underwater. So the question is, how much price action is there really going to be? If 50% of people sell, that could be a lot. Maybe everyone's going to sell the ETH that they accumulated in terms of their interest or their rewards that they've been making for staking. So there's a lot of volatility expected because now you can stake and unstake your tokens, which is interesting because I also think a lot of more institutions are going to move in. And I think that you might see an initial sale, but ultimately, I think this is a massive, massive positive for Ethereum. And then other improvements, I think this is the most important part. Other improvements, this is an article on Decrypt by Nathan Reef titled, "What is Ethereum Shanghai Upgrade?" And at the bottom here, the other improvements say EIP 4895 is a key development, which is the unstaking of the ETH. But there's some other ones. They're supposed to reduce gas fees, so that should be nice during high activity to benefit the Ethereum developers. So I don't know that this actually impacts anything to do with actual trading fees, but it says it proposes lower gas costs related to maximum extractable value payments when accessing a Coinbase address, and Coinbase is the name of the software, not the company. There's another update which aims to lower gas costs generally for developers, and then there's another one that caps developer costs. So basically, it's going to make it good for developers to continuously develop. It's going to make it cheaper for building, but not necessarily for trading. It's considered a relatively small upgrade, but it'll have the most significant impact for those with staked ETH because who knows what's going to happen. And then later this year, there should be an Ethereum virtual machine upgrade, which just means that, programmability is going to increase. So that's the news. We got, big conversations about de-dollarization. I do think it's real, but I also am I'm being careful not to just jump on board because who knows? I mean, what if China's economy teeters and collapses, or they end up going to war over Taiwan, and and then what's that going to do to currency situation? Well, if we stand up for Taiwan, maybe, I don't know. What do you think? I just don't think this stuff's happening overnight. And I think a black swan event at any time could make the US dollar even more attractive. And don't forget, just because countries don't want to buy US dollars or US debt anymore, statistics show that the vast majority of individuals, citizens around the world, they want dollars. So what I say, make the US dollar the reserve currency of the crypto space by allowing Coinbase, Circle, to blow USDC up and make them hyper regulated, so that way that no one ever has to worry about depegging. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment below. I want to hear from you. Hodl on.